This is Akashvani. In the program Spotlight, now we bring you a discussion on agenda for special session of Parliament. The participants are K.V. Prasad, political analyst, and Ashwini Srivastav, journalist.
The 5-day session of Parliament is all set to begin from Monday. Ending the suspense and speculation, the government has listed its agenda. The two houses will hold a discussion on Parliament's 75-year journey, starting from the Constituent Assembly that had first met on December 9, 1946 on the first day of session. During the session, the government has also listed the bills on the appointment of the Chief Election Commissioner and other election commissioners to be taken up for consideration and passage. The bill was introduced in Rajya Sabha during the last monsoon session. This special session is also likely to see the proceedings of Parliament moving from the old building to the new Parliament building. There are many more things in the agenda, but first let us discuss on the business that would be taken on the first day of the session, which is the discussion on Parliament's 75 years journey. K.V. Prasad sir, how important is this discussion and why this discussion is being held now?
Well, I think the government has made its intent very clear. It is a special session, and I think the very fact that their opening day, they're introducing this discussion on 75 years journey of Indian Parliament, beginning from what the Constituent Assembly's work started. So it's a very important thing because the current generation and also around this time should be aware of the hoary past of Indian Parliament and its long journey, how the Indian Central Legislative Assembly became the Constituent Assembly, and then the Constituent Assembly turned into Provisional Parliament till 1952, when the first Lok Sabha was constituted after the general elections in 51-52. So I think it's a history that most of us have read probably in the civics or social studies when we were, and some others as they progressed and took political science and other subjects of interest. But for a larger section of the people, many things are lost over a period of time or have covered with some kind of a time dust. So in a way, it's good that we are going to look back as to the contributions made by the Indian constitution makers, immense contribution they did in terms of drafting the constitution, debating it, and arguing all sides, eventually evolving a consensus which became enshrined at the Indian constitution. So I think that's the big agenda one would see as it goes.
What's that the government or the country's leadership wishes to convey to the people through this discussion? What is the intention behind it?
Well, I think my personal thought always that it wants to bring, as I said, the contribution of important junctures of the 75-year journey of Indian Parliament, the way lawmaking has been processed, the way in which discussion and debate took place on various issues, which led to policy formulations, which led to understanding of the societies and the problems that people of those times faced and how Parliament and parliamentarians applied themselves to this task. So that is a larger canvas that is there. Probably in a way, one day would be too less if one were to say so, because covering a 75-year journey would require a lot of, it's a wide canvas. But nonetheless, the few hours that the government has earmarked for this discussion should be important in conveying the sense of contribution of Indian Parliament in the well-being of the country and making laws as the time progressed is the way I look at it.
Right. You rightly mentioned that one day is too less to discuss on such an important topic. K.V. Prasad sir, how do you see the journey of Parliament so far?
I started somewhere in 1995 and 97 we had the 50th anniversary of Indian independence. The Parliament special session took place. And as a personal recall, I can say it was a midnight session starting in Central Hall. Then Speaker Mr. P.A. Sangma presided over it. Leaders of various political parties were present. We heard the midnight speeches of the 1947 were played. And so it was a nostalgic moment for people like us who were never witness to 1947. Transfer of power took place. So that being the fact, but in this 25, 30 odd years that I have been reporting Parliament and both houses of Parliament, we have seen very landmark legislations passing. In fact, two or three which always bring to my mind is the kind of the sweep of Indian parliamentarians on policy issues, which has been discussed and debated not just in one session or two sessions, but over a few sessions spanning a few years. If I were to give you an example, for instance, the decision to send the Indian peacekeeping forces in Sri Lanka, that became a matter of hot debate and went on for two, three years in Parliament, finally till the troops came back home. Then if you look at fast forward, the WTO debate, India joining the World Trade Organization, that again debate encapsulated what was happening outside of Parliament what was happening, and parliamentarians took up issues on various issues because it was a very complicated subject at that point of time. And if I fast forward and bring to the other legislation, is the Indo-US nuclear deal and the concomitant, the Civil Nuclear Liabilities Act. So these are debates which went on and on, where parliamentarians kept on insisting that the executive under the Constitution has the power to sign international agreements. Especially in the WTO, this debate became very intense when people started questioning this thing. But then that is what discussion and debate was all about. And that was just 2 or 3 things which I could bring immediately to attention.
Right. And what all transformation has come in the functioning of the parliament? Any noteworthy thing that you would like to mention?
Well, I think the biggest scene I've seen the change of landscape concerning the press and media, if I were to say so in short, because we belong to this fraternity. Till about 90, the predominance of print media in coverage of parliament, the kind of access, everything available. Then came the television era, and now we are in the social media era. So you've seen this transformation in which the members of parliament communicate with the people at large and the constituents in particular. This has undergone a significant change. In addition, the new technology that allows members of parliament to use the technology to communicate directly, as I said, to its constituents and the world at large as to what their thought is on issues of contention or otherwise. So that is a very wide thing, because you're no longer confined to a few sections who are being articulate. Many others are now coming. So this, I think, the kind of technological revolution has altered the way communications and altered the way members of parliament function. In return, it also puts additional pressure, I would presume, on members of parliament, in the sense they get a greater feedback with better interaction with their own constituents, with their own people. So I think that is something which we will see more and more as we go along in these days.
Right. Let's talk a bit about politics, which is going on ahead of this special parliament session. Opposition had alleged that the government could be having legislative grenades up its sleeves. And one of the Congress leaders, that is Jairam Ramesh, has said there is more behind the curtains. How do you see such allegation? And also, KV Prasad said there have been a speculation about one nation, one election bill that may come up in this session. So how do you see such speculations?
Well, political parties are free to speculate, free to raise issues which they think needs to be brought to the public's knowledge. Well, as of now, one will have to go by the list of business which we saw issued in the parliamentary bulletin. It's very clear day one takes the special session of the day one takes precedence on discussion. And there are 4 bills, and all bills are important for various reasons. We all know how these bills have been crafted. Some of them have been introduced, some of them been passed by one house, will have to be transmitted to the other house for follow-up legislative action. So that's being the case. But I think politics does happen because probably some members of parliament have referred to the journey in the last few years when bills were brought up at a lesser notice period. So I think that could be probably playing on the back of the mind. But nonetheless, members of parliament, even if it is one nation, one poll, or even any other bills that I'm sure political parties which have been around for a while have enough material to come to the house, to the floor and discuss these issues, because they've been in politics, they've been in parliament for a number of years. So they'll have the positions on many of these already lined up, is my guess.
And though you rightly mentioned that on the agenda or the business that has been shared by the Secretariat, this one nation, one poll is not mentioned. But how do you see this concept of one nation, one election? Will it be beneficial for the country? And why there is opposition on this proposal? Very short, before we take up other business that would be taken up in the special session.
Well, there are arguments both for and against it, but there are some practical difficulties. I think in one of the earlier programs we did discuss on the radio itself, there are some practical challenges that need to be looked at because curtailing certain legislative assemblies tenures and advancing certain legislative tenures to synchronize it will take some time. So those are issues which people are not very clear as to how exactly that can be done. But in any case, now we have the former president, Mr. Ramnath Kovind committee, which is looking into it. So as of now, we should wait for what the committee comes up with its recommendations on the terms of reference that has already been typed. So that's where I can leave it at that.
Let's talk about the legislative business. The government has also decided to clear 4 bills, including the one on appointment of the Chief Election Commissioner, which has generated much controversy. The listed business for Lok Sabha includes the Advocates Amendments Bill 2023 and the Press and Registration of Periodicals Bill 2023, which were already passed by Rajya Sabha last month. Besides, the Post Office Bill 2023 has also been listed in the Lok Sabha business. The bill was earlier introduced in Rajya Sabha on August 10. The list of businesses is tentative, the government has maintained, and more items can be added. And meanwhile, the government has also convened a meeting of the floor leaders of all political parties on September 17th, a day before the start of the 5-day session. How important is this meeting, especially in the backdrop of opposition parties' alliance against the ruling dispensation?
Well, this is not the first time when the alliance comes to parliament, because we just had the monsoon session where some of these people were still working together. As a matter of fact, the floor coordination has been on for a while. And I say a while, almost for 1 year, till a formal platform, they all came together in the alliance they have formed. But coming to these bills, I think these bills are already there. For instance, if we talk of the appointment of the Chief Election Commissioner and the other election commissioners, which was introduced in Rajya Sabha. So this will repeal the earlier Election of Commission 1991 Act, which actually expanded the number of people in the Election Commission. From a single member, it became a 3-member. Well, I think we all know it generates, it comes from the Supreme Court decision where it said, of course, that formed a committee on the selection of issue. Now the government has the right, because even in the Constitution, it was given, if come up with a thing, I think Article 324 of the Constitution, which the Election Commission consists of the Chief Election Commission and such number of other election commissioners as the President may decide. Of course, now there is a formal structure that the government is putting in place as to who will pick up the election commissioner. Now, I think it is very clear, the bill tells us the Prime Minister is the chairperson, the leader of the opposition in the Lok Sabha as the member, a union cabinet minister nominated by the Prime Minister as a member. And it also is clear that if the leader of opposition in Lok Sabha has not been recognized, the leader of the single largest opposition party in Lok Sabha will assume that role. So clearly, the government has made sure, for instance, the current House, we all know, the Congress party, which doesn't have the numbers to qualify for a leader of the opposition position, you have a leader in that role. So I guess that could firmly fit in. But that apart, I think, as I said, different political parties have their own view on this particular thing. And we have heard about this whole thing. Well, once the bill comes to the floor, we can hear discussion and different points of view and see how best, if there are any issues that need to be negotiated, if per se. I'm sure parliamentary managers on all sides will sit down and work on this bill to become an act, Nirav.
But will it appear that this bill will have a smooth sail in the parliament, or it will face a stiff opposition from the opposition parties?
Well, going by the trend of the last few sessions, some of these bills of contentious nature, in particular in this thing, there has bound to be every political party, be it who are on the opposition side or who are some of them who are neutral, if I were to say, which means equidistant from both the governing coalition and those in the opposition. So they have their own viewpoints. We have heard some of these viewpoints in public, but this will be the time to come up and discuss and debate it. Well, smooth sailing, as I said, if the leaders meeting of which you asked on the 17th, which is an important thing, if some kind of a consensus is emerged on a couple of issues or a couple of bills, those bills can just go through without much of a hiccup, is what I feel.
Right. There have been, charges from the opposition parties that as to why government did not wait for the winter session.
Well, see, the government is well within its rights to call for a session anytime. There have been occasions, this is not unprecedented in that sense of a term. In this very government tenure, in the first, I think we had one on the GST, which was a midnight session. And I think, so it's not that even in the earlier times, I think somewhere in 91, as I mentioned, 1997, there was a special session of Parliament, which I just mentioned a while ago, I attended, which went on for almost 2 days after the midnight session, when we heard there were only speeches, there was nothing else, and a resolution passed. Leaders of all political parties in Parliament had affirmed on many things, including the fact that there will be no disturbance of question hour. Of course, that's history. So there have been sessions in the past too. So I don't see it as unprecedented in that sense of term.
You explained in detail various agenda of this special 5-day session of the Parliament, which will begin from Monday. Thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on agenda for special session of Parliament. The participants were KV Prasad, political analyst, and Ashwini Srivastav, journalist. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of Akashvani.